Okay, this is our last unit on patterns and equations, and we're going to look at making a table and looking for a pattern. So this is building on what we have talked about already in our previous two lessons, so it's the next step. And so we can make our own table. Now, in the pattern on the screen, as each column is added, as you up here, the total number of squares is increased. So you record all of the number of columns on the next number of squares. So if we have one column, so we have one column here, we're going to have we'd have the 2 squares. And so for 2 columns, 3 columns, and 4 columns. So they record, and then we are going to record what the pattern is. All right, and then so the rule for this one would be we would have to multiply by 2. So as you can see, we have a picture representation of what we are doing in the columns. So if you have one column, you're going to have 2 squares. 2 columns, you'll have 4 squares. 3 columns, you'll have 6 squares. And 4 columns, you'll have 8 squares. Sounds simple enough. But now we're going to look at it a little bit more, at some a little bit more complex ones. So this is what we're looking at today, is just basically looking at the number and then finding a representation. And so you would draw the same thing, and you can draw pictures to represent and find it, and then find what your role will be. So, but there are a couple that are going to be a little bit more complex or a little more complicated. And so this is where the patterns get a little bit harder. So let's look at one more example like this, and then we'll go on to a more complicated one. So you may come across something like this. You have your pattern here, and then you can see that we have our table here, number of blocks and number of stories. So you have number of blocks, and then you have the number of stories. Stories, kind of think of a building. 1 story, 2 story, 3 story, 4 story, 5 story. So pretend this is a building, and then you see how many blocks you have. Number of stories versus number of blocks. So now we have to find the rule. So if we look at the first one, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 15 blocks, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stories. Second one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 blocks with 1, 2, 3, 4 stories. Third one, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 blocks with 1, 2, 3 stories. So we have to decide what we're doing. Now we're going from larger to smaller, so we know we either have to subtract or divide. And since 15 minus 5 is 10, and we know that 12 minus 10 is not 4, we know that we're going to have to divide. So what are we dividing by? We can see 3 columns, so 15 divided by 3 is 5. So we know we're going to have to divide by 3. Now we can also see that we are going to, we'll have to continue on with our blocks too to help us demonstrate this, so we can continue drawing as blocks. We know that we're going down 1 level each time, and so going down 1 level, and then we still have 3 across. So the next one will be with 3 blocks with 2 stories, and the next one after that will be one story with 3 blocks. So for the next one, we'll have 6 blocks with 2 stories and 3 blocks with 1 story. And so we know also, besides counting down, that our pattern is that we are dividing by 3. And so this is another easy pattern. Well, there are a couple other patterns that you may come across that are not as easy as just adding everything by 4, adding everything by 5, or multiplying everything by 4, or dividing everything by 4, or subtracting everything 4. There may be a couple more complex patterns that you may come across. So let's look at a couple more complex patterns that you may see even today when you work on your project that use a different sort of pattern. All right, so let's look at those. So let's look at this one. This one looks a little bit different. It's just not the same as just 2 rows and then have 4 squares. So it's a little bit different. So this is something that you may come across, and the pattern is going to look different as well. So it says for the number of rows, we have 2 rows, 1, 2, because rows are up and down. So 1, 2 rows, and then we have number of squares, 1, 2, 3. So we can see that we have 3 squares. Number of rows, 1, 2, 3. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 down here. Then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. And you can see these are going up by 1 each, 4 and 5 and 6. So if we have 4 rows, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then if we have 6 rows, we don't have that one yet, but we could draw it. But we can also find the pattern. Now the difference between this is 2 is plus this is plus 1. This is plus 2. This one is plus 3. Plus 4. And so the pattern is a little bit different this time. We aren't going to exactly, the pattern isn't just add the same number each time. It is adding with an increment. So this one, if you can tell, is going to be plus 5. So we could draw another picture and have 1 at the bottom and 1 here, and so you can see it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then we'd have 11 here. You can see 11, or you can add 6 plus 5 equals 11. So those are 2 ways you can find the patterns. Now there's one more that we've come across that you've already come across this year, but you may have forgotten, is dealing with perfect squares. So let's look what the pattern would look like if it was a perfect square. So again, we have seen this before when we were talking about perfect squares. Now let's look at this. Number of rows. How many rows do we have? Rows are left, these rows. So we have 1 row right here. So we'd have 1 triangle. So number of triangles, 1. We have 2 rows. We're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 triangles. 3 rows, 1, 2, 3. We're going to have 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 triangles. So you notice it is now we're working with perfect squares. We have 1 times 1 times 1, 2 times 2 equals 4, 3 times 3 equals 9. So these are our perfect squares over here. And we can pull these out too. So 4 times 4 is, and then we'll know this one is 5 times 5. So that's perfect squares. Now I could draw the triangles again, and you could see it, or I can see 4 times 4 is 16, 5 times 5 is 25. So those are a couple more tricky things that you may come across. So go ahead and look out for those. Go ahead and work through the problems. I just wanted you to be prepared for things that you may see with these patterns as they get a little bit more complex. All right, and again, this is the last lesson in this unit on patterns and equations.